formalize a little bit of what I've been talking about. Okay. $1.7 trillion, $38,000 per student. And now people who are about my age in the millennial category, who were 25 to 34 in the year 2018, 94% of them, according to one poll, said that their number one goal is to be debt-free. But in addition to student loans, millennials tend to take on even more debt in other areas. Student loans aren't even, they're the biggest, but they're not even the primary debt that most people have. Now, again, you would think, it's often said in some of the political statements, well, America just doesn't care about college. The United States just doesn't care about college and education. We don't spend enough on college and education. The United States is second only in its amount of spending per student. Government spending, that is taxpayer spending, per student in the world, second only to Luxembourg. And we spend about over $30,000 per student. That is, the US government spends it in these programs. So what I just described is a crazy situation that you as a college student potentially have to navigate as a 17 or 18-year-old. And this is doing all the things that you were told to do. Here's where debt ranks in life goals of millennials. Okay, 94%, paying off debt, being debt-free. The burden of debt weighs on people. Okay, how many have debt, kinds of debt they have, student loan, credit card, auto loan, home loan, personal loan, other. The only appreciating asset is the home loan. I mean, the loan, it's not the loan itself, but the only appreciating asset potentially is the home. All these other things depreciate. Student loan debt is actually more than this, but it's becoming the biggest area of US consumer debt besides housing. And this is the situation that I just described. We have the typical 17, 18-year-old in the United States of America that is put under tremendous pressure to take out massive debt. This 17 or 18-year-old would not qualify for a home loan and is very unlikely to pay back the debt. Yet, if they don't, the US government, through the taxpayer, will cover it. So more and more and more loans are made. As more and more and more loans are made to people, students just like this, who are just doing what they were told to do, just doing what they thought they were supposed to do, just doing what they thought was necessary to get an education and to get ahead in life, and what they were told by well-meaning and well-intentioned adults was to take out all this debt so that they could handle the expenses of this 4 years. And as the system is flooded with more demand on college, college prices increase. The same amount of supply, increased demand, means increased prices. Then along with all the federal money that was being poured into this system, with federal money comes a need for an administrative bureaucracy, meaning people who are hired to basically handle the paperwork and facilitate the system in colleges and other places. And that causes the costs of college to skyrocket as well. Whereas in the 1960s, it used to be that you could work a summer job and pay for tuition at Harvard. Now, that's not really possible unless you're working on an oil rig or something like that. Now, the focus of that has been, well, minimum wage hasn't kept up. But minimum wage, remember, does not require that anybody gets hired or keeps a job. Only 1.9% of people make at or below the federal minimum wage. There's the aspect of inflation that depletes the value of the money, that takes away from the purchasing power of the wages that people do make. However, just focusing on wages doesn't give you a full grasp of the nature of what's going on. And so this 17, 18-year-old attends college, hopefully finishes with a degree, although 50% don't. Colleges will actually advertise in a positive way, saying that they have a 50% pass rate, meaning, or a graduation rate. And that is unusually good. Although if you got a 50% on a test, that would be an F. That would be a failure, right? But colleges now, some have even termed colleges as dropout factories, because they've, in bringing in all this new money that's coming from the loans and other sources, they lowered admission standards and they receive the money, and the loan making institutions receive the money, whether the student finishes or not. So 50% of people don't. So if you decide on college, you need to be aware of starting and finishing, or figuring out pretty early if college is not for you. Now, there is a way to do that, and you can even spend some time. And that's by going to an inexpensive community college, knocking out general eds. A community college is 83% cheaper on average than a state university, and 93% cheaper than a private college. And for the first 2 years, you will take general education classes that are within a range, basically the same classes, whether you take it at a community college, state university, or private college. But at community college, it's 83% cheaper or 93% cheaper. And that gives you the opportunity to get credit, save money, and figure out whether or not college is for you. Because if you go and spend a couple $100 to go to community college and you decide college isn't for you, it's a couple $100. But if you spend over $10,000 for 6 months to figure out that college isn't for you, that's $10,000 that you owe, right? That's a big difference. So this 17, 18-year-old, what we haven't told them in terms of cost benefit analysis and return on investment is that, was this 4 years and paying for it with student loans worth giving up this line in the future, which is, I put 18.5 years and $25,000 plus a mountain of interest that you owe whether you got a degree or not. Often people, and I understand this, people say, look, is doing college debt-free even possible? And I say, yes, not only is it possible, but with hard work and a strategy, you can do it, and it is worth it. And I'm going to show you how to do it step by step, and and we are going to work through it together. And if you take out student loans, I don't think any less of you, but just I want you to be fully aware of the options and the alternatives so that you don't feel like debt is the only way. And if you take out debt, have strategies of, all right, here's how you need to go about paying it off. So what's often not told to students, though, young people, the age where they're entering college, is that what you're getting for taking out student loans is 4 years of getting paid for and hopefully getting a degree, hopefully getting a job at the end, is you're giving up years of time that are under the burden of debt, maybe preventing you from working where you want to work, maybe preventing you from moving where you want to move, maybe preventing you from participating in things, doing the things that you want to do. So years of time. It's also preventing time and money from major financial decisions like purchasing a home or saving for retirement and things like that. So it's inhibiting all that as well. You have to often put pause on all those things. And you have to pay back $25,000. So even if you start out making $50,000, you start out owing $25,000 and it grows because of the interest. So again, when people say, is it possible to do school debt free? The answer is yes, but I turn it around the other way and I say, what's the alternative? If you do school with debt, the general average alternative that happens to most people is giving up something like this in order to get the 4 years of school paid for. So in my mind, there's just no way. You much better to work really hard for these 4 years to pay for school debt free, which a lot of people think is impossible, and eliminate this than to get those 4 years covered at the expense of your future money and time. So economically, you've got two choices. This is opportunity cost. That human beings, we've learned about this, that we give up what is less valued. A less valued means to higher valued ends. We give up what we want less in order to get what we want more. That's what sacrifice is. But sacrifice also works with the aspect of time. That when we sacrifice in the present for something in the future, usually the reward is larger in the future. When we sacrifice or we receive the reward in the present, that means we are sacrificing in the future. And usually the sacrifice is larger. Same thing works with student loans. I think the choice is better to sacrifice right now and for the next 4 years to pay for college debt free, to reap the larger reward in the future, rather than to have the reward of 4 years of school paid for through student loans with the typical sacrifice that you have to give up in your future. So another thing to think about here is often people take out student loans under the assumption that their loans will be forgiven. And you can look up the actual stats on this. And I have a lot more on this that we'll get to at another time. But I'll just tell you this. So this is the difference, by the way, of imagine how someone might behave and the risks they might take if you were walking on a tightrope, but you knew there was a net that was going to catch you. Now imagine if you were walking on a tightrope and you thought somebody's walking on a tightrope and they thought that there was a net, but there is no net there to catch them. But they still think there is, right? Versus somebody walking on a tightrope knowing that there is no net to catch them. Those are all different situations in terms of how people would think and behave. Well, one of the nets that people think is going to catch them when they take out student loans is student loan forgiveness. And I'll just tell you right up front, your student loans will not be forgiven. Now, there are a few people, there are a small, fortunate percentage that have had some, maybe very few that have had all of their student loan debt forgiven. But it is not likely to be you. It's not likely to be anybody because of the numbers. That there are certain requirements for the student loan forgiveness programs that currently exist. There are qualifications that you have to meet that are very narrow. And some of the qualifications, sometimes people think, well, okay, I'm going to take out all these student loans and it doesn't really matter because I was told that if you teach for 5 years in a low income area, you will receive student loan forgiveness. Wrong. Some of that, it has an aspect of some truth in it, but it's not the whole picture. That may be partially true, but that means it usually has qualifications like this. You had to be making your payments on the student loans faithfully for about 10 years. Then you had to apply. And in applying, you have to perfectly fill out all the paperwork and jump through all of these hoops without errors, mistakes, misunderstandings, any of these things taking place in any of that paperwork for applying. At any time, you could realize that you do not apply, you do not qualify for student loan forgiveness because most student loan forgiveness programs are very narrow. They only apply to a few people. So look at the numbers here, and I have more on this, but it's just to communicate that there is no net there to catch you. And by the way, you're not going to vote the problem away, and you're not going to vote in free college, and you're not going to vote in somebody who's going to give you something that they do not possess. And even if you did, okay, I'm not saying one way or the other on that, but even if you did, even if you voted for the person who apparently was going to have the power within the American government to give you what you think you want as far as a quote unquote free college, it would not apply to you in the next 4 years. And even when loan forgiveness was brought up recently, which Joe Biden said he wasn't going to do it, but even when it's being pushed, they were only going to forgive $6 billion of it when it's $1.7 billion, trillion dollars, excuse me. So they were only going to forgive a portion of the problem. And if you think about this, if the situation is so dire and serious to the point of a real crisis, that these loans are such a burden on people that they need to be forgiven, then why are they being made on the one hand and forgiven on the other? That at a certain point is a broken system. So it's not that taxpayers don't spend enough for college. It's not that Americans don't care about education. It's not that the US government doesn't pour enough money into it. We're the second to Luxembourg of the amount of money that our government spends toward education in the world. It's that this system has created the incentives that make it more and more expensive each year. And unfortunately, this is a system that you guys and I have to navigate. We have to figure it out, but it is possible. But not if you go in with bad assumptions, like that your loans are going to be forgiven, because they're not. Look at the amount of people who applied, sent in applications through public service. Only 518 of those people actually got it in March 2019. That's 0.7%, less than 1%. So I recommend, if somebody has student loan, and they think, okay, well, maybe I do qualify for one of those student loan forgiveness programs. That is a tertiary strategy for dealing with the loans. There's primary, secondary, tertiary, meaning you can do it, doesn't hurt to ask, but don't depend on it. It's kind of like in Malcolm in the Middle. Dewey from Malcolm in the Middle, they ask him something, they're like celebrating his birthday, and it's kind of lame. And they ask him, are you having a good birthday? And he goes, I expect nothing, and I'm still disappointed. That's student loan forgiveness. Expect nothing, be ready to be disappointed anyway. Okay, so how do we do it? Here's what we look at. And then we're going to elaborate on these more fully later. College choice. You need to choose an affordable college. You need to know what it is, what's possible, what you can afford to pay for, given all the factors that we're going to look at. You need to make an adult financial decision in terms of college. You need to make a plan and stick to it. You need to do cost-benefit analysis of college itself. You need to decide on college based on 3 things. Here's why you go to college, and this actually applies outside of college as well. Thing number 1, skills that it will give you and competency in order to create value for others. That's what makes you hireable. That's what makes you serve others well. That's what makes you employable. Skills, competency. Think about it this way. If you could just take the classes and not receive the degree at the end, would college likely have provided you with the skills necessary to do the job that you want to do? And I think the answer, if a lot of people are honest, is no. So I want you to think about it. That's not the only one. Remember, I have 2 more, but that should be the primary reason for whether you do college or otherwise, is my course of action that I'm going to take, the direction that I'm going to go in. Will it give me the skills that I currently do not have or do not have enough of yet in order to do the job that I want to do, that will create value for others, serve others really well? Okay, because your employer, any employment you have, is not based on how much you need. It's based on how hard you are to replace. McDonald's worker can be a good person. Brain surgeon can be a good person. They're both equal in their human dignity. But the brain surgeon is more difficult to replace than the entry-level McDonald's worker. They're both serving people. They're both doing their work. They're both living peaceful in society. There's nothing wrong with either one of them. They both have a certain skill. but one is harder to replace than the other. One's labor is more scarce than the other. There is a different level of demand for one type of labor versus the other. And therefore, there's a differential in their payments, in their compensation. So, in going to college, number one, is it going to provide you the skills and competency, or at least move you toward the skills and competency that you will need to create value in your given field? Number two, will it give you the certification that you need? That's what we say, the piece of paper. Sometimes you need the piece of paper to do a certain job. You can't do a certain job without a bachelor's degree. So we don't ignore the certifications and say, well, that's stupid. This society should change around me. We say, no, the certification is part of what's necessary, fair or otherwise, what's necessary right now to do the job. So will college give me, number one, the skills, number two, the certification to do the job that I plan to do that will allow me to create value? Number three is access. Okay. Access is kind of along with certification, but sometimes you can't even apply for a job. I mean, you can always apply, it seems, but you can't always apply for a job unless you have a degree. Sometimes it's used as a sorting tool, okay, where, well, other people have the job. A lot of other people with the same qualifications are applying. Someone else has a degree plus those qualifications, they might get hired. That's access, okay? So whether you choose college or not, what is going to give you those three things? And then you have to make a grown-up decision financially about college choice. And you need to think, is the cost that I'm going to incur for my chosen college worth the benefits that I will receive? Then you need to do a return on investment of your own degree, because not all degrees will give you the same return on investment. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But you need to say, okay, what is the average amount that I can expect realistically with my degree in my chosen field, starting out? And then you decide based on that whether or not college is the right course and whether or not you're choosing the right college for the right thing. Right? So an English degree is different in terms of return on investment than an engineering degree. There's nothing wrong with English, art, the humanities, and it's not qualitatively, it's just different, okay, than engineering, STEM, okay? But the truth is, one is going to is much more likely to make you more money than the other. And that's fine, but you have to calculate that in as well. Is what I'm paying for the degree that I hope to get worth it to me? Okay, so that's part of calculating the cost of college. Then we'll look at other ways to mitigate those costs. One way is working during college, apply for 1,000 scholarships, and we're going to come up with some other strategies as well. Those aren't the only two strategies of stuff practically to do, but these are just some things to start thinking about.